So that gives you, I'm like, okay, great. So my journey with Shakespeare, that's one of the bumps in the road. I'm like, great, that doesn't really fill me with much confidence. So I avoided it. And I just thought, you know what, maybe this is just not something I do. You know, I also don't sing. So maybe just, it's not something I'll explore. Maybe I just avoid doing Shakespeare. It just might not be something that's in my repertoire, and that's fine. Like, I came to accept that for a number of years. I used to work with a group of actors that did a lot of Shakespeare, you know, in other projects. And then we would work together. We did a lot of things that were, that had a lot of stage combat surrounding them. I used to associate with a group of actors who had this playwright who would write a lot of short plays that had a lot of stage combat in them. So it was kind of like a hop, skip, and a jump away from Shakespeare, which also has a lot of combat in it, right? Like working with, you know, swords or staffs, all of that type of stage combat stuff, like that type. And so a lot of times he would also put on Shakespeare shows. And I remember, I'm like, well, this is not something I'm going to be involved with. I don't get it. I've never gotten it. And I was only maybe in one, before working with BrooklynOne, I was only in one Shakespeare show, and I had a very small part, and it was fun. Like, it was such a small role. I'm like, okay, this amount of words I can get, you know what I mean? Like, I understand it. My objective is correct. I'm, you know, I'm not saying anything wrong. Like, it's all good. And I didn't really have the opportunity to do it again until BrooklynOne.
Yeah.
And I forgot how I found the audition, but I'm like, okay, you know what? Like, I'll try it. I have, like we all do in my, you know, auditions book, I've got like my Shakespeare monologue. I did it. And Anthony Marino put me in Julius Caesar as Caesar's wife. And what was nice is also, like, as you've seen, we cut down the shows because we don't do 3 hours. That would kill all of us.
Yeah.
He cut it down, and what was great is he made my part bigger. Like, and I guess, like, I'm not going to put words in his mouth. I guess he, like, trusted me enough that, like, okay, we're going to give you more to do, because Caesar's wife is not really in the show a whole lot. So he put me, like, toward the end as well, like, stuff that normally, like, the townspeople would say, he had me say as Caesar's wife. So that was nice. It really was the first time I was given something. And it was also not an easy role, because there's a very, you know, it's a very dramatic scene where after Caesar has died and she's addressing the town. Again, it's supposed to be the townspeople, and now it's like, okay, these are my lines. So I'm essentially yelling at the townspeople for not trusting my husband. Like, that's what happens at the end. It's a very dramatic scene. It was not easy. And I was really grateful, because that was the first time I ever dived into something like that. And it was like, I don't know, it's like a switch turned on. I'm like, oh, I get it. Like, this is not that, I get it. This is not that intimidating. I can do this. And granted, I still have the same process. Like, some people can just read Shakespeare and totally understand what's going on. I still don't really have that ability. It's better, but I still also need to do the translation. I'm like, this is what I just read. Here's what it means. And then I can do the after work, you know? I still have to do that, but I'm so less intimidated by it. It's more like, this is in my repertoire. This is like, no, I can do this. Like, no problem whatsoever. So it opened up like a whole new world. And I told Anthony that. I told him that last year when I directed the show, and I was like, this is what started it, is he, you know, I was not part of BrooklynOne before that. I knew literally nobody that was part of BrooklynOne. I knew none of these people. And when I was cast, and then the people that have been around for a number of years, I'm like, oh God, okay, they all know each other. This is intimidating. Because in theater, that happens a lot. It's fine. You work with the people that you know on multiple projects.
It's a very small world.
Absolutely, yeah, and it happens all the time. So when I'm here and I'm like, I am totally on the outside of all this, like, little circle, but they were like, welcome me with open arms. He, you know, Anthony, I guess I would think, because he's been letting me work for a while now, like enjoyed my work, appreciated it, like liked what I was doing, kept me around. And the fact that it was because of a Shakespeare role is still a little mind-blowing to me, because again, for so many years, it was something that I'm like, this is just something that's, it's just not for me. For so many years, I'm like, it's just not my thing. I'm just not going to do it. And then now I'm like, yeah, like, let's do it all the time. Do more of them. Let's do let's do all of Shakespeare's works. Like, bring it on, you know? Now I'm like, it's totally something that doesn't scare me anymore, which is still amazing. It's because I did that as an adult. I've only been, you know, working with BrooklynOne for 4 years. So it, you know, an older dog can learn new tricks, which I was pleasantly surprised by.
Now, how was it actually directing? I'm trying to remember what last year's was. Last year's play was
Taming of the Shrew.
That's what it was. For some reason, I actually thought it was 12th Ninth, because you mentioned 12th Ninth before. It's like, it feels like that. It feels like, but yeah, it was Taming of the Shrew. I remember now.
Taming of the Shrew. Yeah.
How was actually directing Taming of the Shrew? Because I know I don't want to say it's a fairly difficult play, but
no, you can say that. It's difficult.
Yeah.
So the year before that, I was Beatrice in Much Ado About Nothing.
Yeah.
Do you remember?
We were both in. Yeah, we were both in it too.
That was also a dream role of mine, because Beatrice, the first time I ever saw Much Ado was the film version with Kenneth Branagh and Emma Thompson, and it's brilliant. They're so good. Yep. One of the things about Shakespeare people always say is that funny Shakespeare, it is so hard to make it funny. If you can laugh, if somebody makes you laugh while they're doing Shakespeare, they are aces. Like, they're brilliant. Yeah. And that movie makes me laugh. I'm like, they're so good. So I remember, and the role of Beatrice is this sarcastic, like, woman who, like, I don't want a husband. I just want to make fun of men and be on my own. I'm like, I love that character. Like, it's great. She just insults Benedict for like the whole show. It's great. It's so fun. And I it's just it's a strong female role.
Oh yeah, it is.
And I love it. So when I auditioned for that, I was like, look, I was like, I'm not really going to be happy doing another role. And I even said that, I'm like, if you don't want to include me because, you know, if there's somebody else that's also that impressed you, that's great. You know, cast them. That's cool. Like, I get it. That's the process. Yeah. But I just know that I didn't fit anywhere else. I was like, this is one of my dream roles. I'm gunning for it. Like, I worked my ass off. I don't know if I can curse, if you want to cut that out.
Yeah, you can curse.
Okay. I worked really hard, and I was very excited and very, very grateful that they're like, yes, you're going to be our Beatrice. It was very, very exciting. And I did say that. It's the first time, by the way, I ever did that. This is a little inside baseball. But for people listening, like, if you go on auditions, on the audition sheet, they say, like, what is your preference role? Would you write down? And then you say, like, would you take any other role? And it was the first time in my life that I put preference role Beatrice. Will you take any other role? No. It's the first time I ever did that. I swear, first time I ever did that. And even as I'm doing it, I'm like, this is ballsy. Like, should I be doing this? I don't know.
That's pretty straightforward too.
But it's also like, I try to not explain it like I'm a jerk. It was just like, I know I wouldn't be happy doing anything else. Like, if they didn't want me as Beatrice, then I would totally still super support the show. I would have gone and cheered them on, because everybody involved was great and talented, and it was amazing. And I would still totally love and support it. I would absolutely understand. But I knew for me, I'm like, I'm not going to be happy at anything else. I just know. And I wouldn't want to, like, you know, I just wouldn't want anything to jeopardize anything. So that's what I put. And it worked out. Thankfully, like, it was great. I was very happy with it. Again, super difficult. That was a very hard role. But I'm very excited that I did it. It, you know, again, the more years that I work with BrooklynOne, the more responsibility the more stuff I get to do, and it's different stuff that I get to do, and it just shoots my confidence way up more and more every year with Shakespeare, which is so great. Because again, this was my white whale. Like, Shakespeare in itself was like, that's my white whale that I had to overcome as a performer. Because to me, it was just, it's a whole world that I thought was never going to be open to me. I just thought, I'm always going to be like this. I'm always going to be scared of it. And so it was great that like, you know, Anthony and Brooklyn One gave me the opportunity to, like, it's not a white whale, it's just a little fish. Like, you can do it. It's fine.
Yeah.
Like, you can take over. So when Much Ado was done, and I was like, you know, this is one of my dream roles. Like, one of the other actresses, Nicole Franz, who also has been working with Brooklyn One for many years, she has during the run of Much Ado, she would always keep telling me like, oh, I wish we could do Taming of the Shrew. Like, she kept whispering about that, like, and kept saying that to Anthony. What about Taming of the Shrew? What about Taming of the Shrew? She kept throwing it out there. And I was like, I remembered that show. Everybody who isn't familiar with it might be familiar with the movie 10 Things I Hate About You, which was a modern retelling of Taming of the Shrew. So that's how I remembered it. I'm like, oh, yeah, okay. And and I just kind of figured, you know what? Like, Taming of the Shrew for me, it's fun, obviously. I've seen it done before. Like, those actors I used to work with put on a production of it, I remember. It's, you know, there's a lot of fun roles. It's very dark, but it can be a lot of fun. And I was like, you know, I don't really have this interest. I don't have like an emotional interest in playing any of these roles to try to go that route. So I remember after Much Ado, I pulled Anthony aside. I'm like, I want to direct. Can I do this? Like, are you okay with me doing this? Because I think I want to. I think I want to take this on. I was very scared. Like, honestly, I was very scared he was going to say no. But I kind of just had this idea of pulling from the fact that 10 Things I Hate About You was this retelling in a high school. But it obviously wasn't that dark. Like, it doesn't have any kind of, it wasn't dark, you know, it wasn't really depressing. It was like a nice movie. There are a lot of elements in Taming of the Shrew that are super dark. And I just had this thought. I'm like, you know, if it's not like this high school movie, it could be like this one. And I thought of Heathers.
Oh my God. That's a great, like, idea of how to essentially, like, when you think of Shakespeare and then you think of how would I have Shakespeare in a high school, you would have to think of another high school movie where it's like, oh, they done it with Othello, with but that was in college.
Yeah.
Was that may have been in college or in high school? I forgot which one, but it was either or.
Yeah.
It was an academic school. And then you have Taming of the Shrew with 10 Things I Hate About You. She's the Man with, what was the other one? 12th Night, I think, again. Anyway, but yeah, but when you think of Taming of the Shrew, and then you think of, like, how would you actually set it inside of school, something like that? And then think of Heathers. And Heathers by itself is almost a Shakespearean-like movie because it's quite dark. It's hilarious, but at the same time,
it's supposed to be a comedy, and there's certain parts of it I go, how? Like, it's so, like, off the beaten path. It's so strange. And I just remember, like, it didn't necessarily, to me, I'm like, doesn't have to be in a high school. I was pulling, it was more like the tone. Do you know what I mean? I watched it and I go, I want this tone where it's super dark, but you're reminded that it's supposed to be funny. And again, why are my influences the way they are? Because I remember thinking, I'm like, this might make people feel uncomfortable, but good. Yeah. I'm like, this is my goal. I'm like, I'm fine to make them uncomfortable as long as it's real. And the dark elements of the show should be very real. So that's how I looked at it. I was more looking at, like, I want to pull from the tone. And also I did, as you've seen, like, it was set in the 80s. So that was also something that was pulled from Heathers. I'm like, I don't really want it super modern. I liked the idea that, I also just like the idea that the characters look so colorful, and some of it is just these very serious scenes. If you're unfamiliar, I mean, Taming of the Shrew, it's this narcissistic guy who's abusing his wife to control her, to break her down and to control her. Comedy, right? Totally. Sounds hilarious. But that was Right, but that was the challenge, is like reading and I go, how the hell is this a comedy? Like this guy is just abusing her. She abuses her sister. Like what part, how am I going to do this? And on top of that, I really didn't want the ending to be like, I didn't want this to be an ending where Catherine loses. Like she loses the entire show. And I wanted this to be somewhat of a positive outcome, because we all like to see the villain get their comeuppance. And I don't know if I'm skipping ahead, but if in the show, Petruchio doesn't get his comeuppance. I mean, the way that it ends on paper is just, hey, here's my wife. I have tamed her. I've trained her to be what she's supposed to be. And Catherine makes this whole big speech, right, about you should be subservient to men. This whole speech is directed not only to the people in their wedding party, because it's right after a wedding, and it's a celebration. It's to the rest of the cast, but she also addresses it to the audience. Hey, ladies, our men do a lot for us. They go out and they fight wars while we're home. Like, we get to be safe, and we get to just be these soft little creatures, and men have to go out and fight for us. So you should be subservient to them. It's this whole giant speech that is super outdated in words.
Yeah.
And I remember one of the first, that was the struggle. That was one of the struggles, is like, she loses this whole time. You see this very strong-willed woman, albeit, she's also abusive to her sister. She's also wrong at certain points. But you see just Petruchio get worse and worse and worse with her, right? He starves her. He makes her wear tattered clothes. Like he keeps dragging her everywhere. He's controlling where she goes, controlling how she says things, like controlling whether or not she eats. Keeps doing like she'll say one thing and he'll say another to confuse her. He does all of these horrible abusive tactics. And then it's justified at the end because she makes this whole speech, and it's like, yeah, he was right. The ends justify the means. I'm a better woman because of it. That's how the whole play reads. And I go, what am I going to do here? Because I didn't want that to be the ending. I like, not necessarily positive, but more so like, I enjoyed the irony of the fact that I want this to end where Kat actually wins.
Ooh,
where
really?
The whole time I want this whole time where she wins, where she's actually like, oh, she's maybe been playing along the whole time, and she actually wins. So, and again, this is what I mean, but I don't know if I'm skipping ahead, but one of the things that I did to change it and to make it and also it made it a little bit more dark, is I had Kat do the speech as genuine as she could. She's like, no, yeah, we are subservient to men, this whole speech. And it's to everybody there. Everyone has a party. And I don't know if you saw it or not, but if you remember at the end, everyone slowly leave.
Yeah. Okay.
So at the end, what I did was, at the end, she makes this speech. Petruchio was like, yeah, that's my wife. Cool. Right, guys? And that's the end.
Yeah.
So what I did was, I'm like, okay, I'll do this. And so they say all the lines. Everybody walks away. Petruchio's the last one to walk away. And before he leaves, you see Kat, and she pulls out a knife and slowly follows him off stage. And she's got this like little like sly, knowing smile on her. And I go, there you go. Have the audience decide whether or not she finally enacted her revenge. They get to decide that, because I had two ways of doing it. I could show it, which I part of me wanted to. Part of me wanted to show this ending as like a dinner. And I wanted her to maybe kill him in view of everybody, but nobody noticing. That was one form I wanted to do. But I did like the idea at the end that maybe no one really knows what happened. And that's not in the script. There are no stage directions in the Shakespeare show that say she pulls out a knife or does any of that. That was just me. I was like, I can't change the words. We can't physically change these words. So I need something else to show that Kat wins. Yeah. I need something else to show that you've seen all this horribleness leading up until now. but don't worry, this is still her story.
Yeah.
I was actually going to have, when I first had this idea and I was very intimidated to direct it on my own, I was going to work with this girl named Jessica Bathurst. I hope I'm not pronouncing her last name, but Jessica worked with BrooklynOne on a few shows, kind of like as a dramaturg. Like she would make sure we're saying things properly, or she would make us understand, hey, you're saying this phrase, here's what it means, you know, here's what Shakespeare meant by it. She would just help with the text a little bit. And she is super smart. She's great at it. I mean, she's taught Shakespeare before. I believe she was a teacher for that. And she was a brilliant resource to have. And she was the first one I went to really ask her, like, do you want to co-direct this with me? Mostly I'm like, I'm scared to do this alone, and you're super smart. Like, we could work together. And she had a different vision of it. Like, respectively, she thought this couldn't be a comedy. Respectively, she thought, I don't think you can do this to where it doesn't look like Kat is abused and that's the end of it. She's like, you know, and she wasn't disrespectful about it whatsoever. She was super supportive, but she's like, my vision of it, I just don't think it can happen. I'm like, okay, that's fair. But she did say something to me that was very helpful. She said, whose story is this? Like, you have to decide whose story this is and then cater to that. I'm like, you're right. This is Kat's story, right? Petruchio takes over a lot of times. And in Shakespeare, obviously, it's an ensemble. Like, there's a lot of main stories they tell, right? They also talk about Bianca and, you know, her suitors. Like, that is also focused on. But I made the choice. I'm like, this is Kat's story. So how do I want Kat's story to end? I'm like, well, I want her to enact her revenge. I don't want her to lose.
Yeah.
Like, how is that going to help anybody? And it's also like, I didn't want to show that. I didn't want to show that some narcissistic jerk off can just do all this stuff and then not get his comeuppance.
Yeah.
So once I made that decision and I had that like thought, I'm like, oh my God, yes. Like, have her pull out a knife at the end. Is she going to kill him? Is she not? Is it just to make herself feel better? Like, you just don't know. That's where the show ends.
Yeah, it's very ambiguous to where you want to do that, because like you said before, Shakespeare doesn't have any stage reps. It's just basically line, and maybe someone enters and someone exits. And if there is a stage direction, it's kind of like, you know, exit pursued by a bear, that sort of thing. But even then, it's just like you could literally have fun with the type of stuff that you have written on a Shakespeare thing. It's like,
it's right. A lot of it is up to your interpretation. But you can't, you know what I mean? You can't change the words. Like, you can't just make up lines. And that was the challenge, is this whole time I'm like, there's so many dark elements to it. And how do I make this to where it doesn't end depressingly? It kind of ends like, ooh, yeah, okay, Kat, I see you. Good. Yeah, go. Like, it's a little bit empowering to me. Like, okay, as dark as it is, like, is she going to kill him? Like, it's a very dark thing, but it's taking back her power that we've seen been beaten out of her, you know, metaphorically and not, like, the whole show.
And speaking of taking back your power, I do want to touch upon your wrestling thing, because this is actually a great segue, because
it's also actually related, because the guy that played Petruchio is a wrestler.
Yeah, it is true, because I will also tell you that when I first wanted to do this, that's also something I had solidified in mind, is like, in Taming of the Shrew, there's a lot of violence. Like, Petruchio hits like his right hand man, you know, Kat hits Bianca. Everybody is abused. And I was like, I want to show that, because I also, like I said, I like keeping things as real as possible, even if it goes very dark. So those who watched it saw the violence get worse and worse. Like, it got more and more kind of scary, realistic. Especially between Petruchio and Kat, their first meeting, you know, it's their first meeting when they're insulting each other back and forth. That was also very, there was a lot of stage combat. There's a lot of physicality in that first meeting. But it's very goofy. You know, he gets kicked in the nuts at some point. Like, it's goofy.
And the more that he abuses her, the more the violence starts to get realistic. He'll pull her hair. I have him slap her at some point. Not real, obviously, it's stage combat, but it just gets more and more realistic, and it looks worse and worse. And I was also honestly very scared at some point that the audience was going to take offense to it. I'm like, it's a woman being hit on stage, even if they understand it's fake. But that was like a certain fear of mine. I'm like, I hope they don't like
actually get up and
endorses. Yeah, I was a little nervous.
Like, you know how, and it's also a public park, because like.
Yeah, I was a little nervous about that. But it was okay. I mean, we didn't have anyone walk out. There was no campaign online. BrooklynOne supports, abusing women. It was nothing like that. People understood, okay, this is part of the show. Like, I'm trying to make it as raw. I wanted to make it as raw as possible, to show how low, like, we can put Kat, how low she can get. Because that's what makes the ending to me so sweet. When we see her pull out the knife, like, oh, there we go, like retribution. But yeah, thankfully we had a wrestler as Petruchio, John. He, a friend of mine went to college with him. And the friend is also involved in wrestling. So he knew about him. And thankfully, cause the guy is like super strong. So like I had him manhandle Nikki, who played Nicole Franz, I mentioned before, she played Catherine. I had him manhandle her because she's very small. She's very thin. Like, she's a tiny girl. And to have this giant wrestler guy just like throw her around, I'm like, we could, like, we had a lot of freedom to play with the physicality, which made that part of it a little bit easier. Like, we could do anything. Like, we could create all these fun stage pictures because I got this giant monster here who could just throw this woman around and have it be super safe. So like, that was really cool. Because when I pictured doing this, I always wanted to bring in a wrestler, from my little circle of people. I always planned on bringing in a wrestler, to help with the quote unquote, the fake fighting. I always planned on doing that. I didn't think for a second that he was going to be our male lead. It just made it like, hey, we got an in-house expert now. So it was really helpful with like certain physical things that he was there to make it look realistic. You know, again, that's, my cornerstone where I go to. I just want it to be as realistic as possible, like stick with realism. So yeah, it was super helpful that he was there. Like, oh, you're the lead and you're also going to help me with all the physical stuff if I get stuck.
But yeah, speaking of wrestling, how did you get into Callous Wrestling as your character? Is it Portia? Yeah, Portia Vaughn.
Portia Vaughn, yeah.
Yeah, Portia Vaughn.
We're breaking kayfabe a little, but that's fine. Yeah, it's Portia.
Kayfabe? What is this thing called kayfabe?
I know. I had a friend interview me like a number of years ago, and we did the same thing. Like, we broke kayfabe, so it's fine.
Kayfabe? Like, what is kayfabe? Like, what is kayfabe now, especially in wrestling?
Yeah.
But yeah, in terms of, are you a trained wrestler, or do you just take on the managerial?
No, absolutely not.
No, you're just like the mouthpiece of just like one of the big.
Exactly.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
no. I have stage combat experience. It's nowhere near the same thing. Again, this is my background is acting and writing and all that stuff. And one of my closest friends, Matt Ryan, started, we were called Capital Wrestling. He started it 3 years ago. And the first thing he said to me is like, I want you to be a manager here, because, if you look at certain parts of it, if you break it down, it is kind of like, it is an acting role. You're pretending to be somebody else and you say words in front of people. Like, it's pretty straightforward in that way. Now, obviously, when I started doing it, I'm like, this is a whole different animal. It is a super different world than I was used to. For acting roles, like for straight theater, I don't get those nerves. Like, I don't get nervous whatsoever. I'm fine. For certain things, for wrestling, if I'm like, if I have like a pretty long promo. Like, I'm scared I'm going to forget things. I worry like how to interact with the audience. Like, there's certain times where I'm like, there's things to overcome that I don't encounter with just performing. Even though when we look at it, we broke it down, like, yeah, you're performing a role, but it's a very different environment. It is very different. So I had,
in terms of promo,
yeah.
In terms of promos, is it essentially like a script where you basically have to remember those lines per se, or is it basically like an outline where it's like, this is what you need to say, and this is what you need to hit on?
It can be both. I've heard, the model that everybody models after, the WWE. I've heard they do both. Like, I've heard they write out things word for word for people to say, and they have to memorize it. But a lot of times, no. A lot of times it is just that. It's you want to hit these bullet points, and you just make up how you get there. And a lot of people can function that way, and I can't really. Like, maybe eventually I'll get there. But I've been doing this for 3 years, and every promo that I've had, I write word for word, and I memorize it like it's a monologue. And granted, I have been told by a few people who, are producers in wrestling, like, you're just giving yourself more work. You realize that, like, you're just making it harder on yourself. And I do recognize that, but it's for my own sanity at this point. Like, for right now, who knows if a few years in the future, I'll feel comfortable doing that with just bullet points and just like flying off the cuff. But for now, that's how I feel comfortable working, is like, what are the bullet points I have to hit? I will write it out, like have essentially a short 60-second monologue, and just memorize it. And it can be very it absolutely can be very stressful. And I've been very nervous, like if I forget something, whatever. Because sometimes I'm not told. There have been some shows, like if I have live promos, like at the actual show, where I'm literally there speaking to the audience, and it's not a backstage interview or promo where we can, stop and start. Sometimes I'm given what I have to say, or the bullet points, I'm giving them like a week before. And to me, that's like sometimes super stressful. Yeah. It's gotten easier. Like, that used to be, I'm like, no, please don't tell me a week. I need like all this time beforehand. But it's gotten easier, where if they tell me a week beforehand, I'm like, oh yeah, I got it, no problem. And now I can write something that's a minute or a minute and a half, and I can do it, and it's okay. Yes, but currently that is how I work, and it's not how everybody works. And a lot of people in the wrestling industry probably think it's the wrong way to do it. And I totally get that. It's just, I'm coming from this other world where that's
this acting perspective. Like it's weird how essentially those who aren't really part of wrestling, you do get the sensation that, it is an act. Again, breaking kayfabe there. It is an act. Everything is scripted. But at the same time, it is live theater in a way, where it's like it is actually like another form of live theater, where it's like you have two people, the heel and the babyface, and they're having their little promo. They have the match. It's like, it's very choreographed. Sometimes it isn't choreographed to do it on the fly, that sort of thing. And but at the same time, it's essentially allowing you to have fun for at least a couple of hours. Because I've been to plenty of wrestling shows where it's like, I have no idea what the story is, but I'm being entertained, I'm being engaged. This is a very engaging show. It's like, and then during the event, some manager, like, a character like you, come out to give a little, like, I hear her say, like, catch up people on, like, this is like almost not like, this is what's been happening, but it's like the heel has the moment to shine, where it's like, essentially, I have like a minute or two, I'm just gonna tear the crowd a new asshole, maybe something like that. Yeah. But still establish some stuff that's been happening in the company, where it's like,
there's storylines you have to hit. It's, a lot of people say it's just a soap opera with punching, like, you know what I mean? Like that's where that whole, awful stereotype is like, well, it's fake. Like, it's not. These people are actually getting hurt. They just know how they're going to get hurt. That's the only difference. They just know how they're going to be hurt. Like, they're actually getting hurt. I don't understand why I never understood that logic of like, well, it's fake. I go, not really. It's how are you faking jumping from the top rope, doing a somersault, and then landing on another body? Like, how do you? It's not fake. Yeah, but that's you know, when Matt started this company, approached me, and I was very nervous. I'm like, yeah, you know, this is not my realm, but there's elements of it that I have done before, so let's see how we go. And there was a character I wanted. Like, I just was toying around with this idea
of the feminist, was it?
Which, right, the femivist, which is feminist activist. It's a combination of two words.
Which I'm always saying. I'm always saying it. I'm always saying it as feminist, but even though I'm trying to say as femivist.
It's activist and feminist
at the
mixed
same
together.
time.
Yeah, and I had to look it up. I was like, did someone else come up with this? All right, cool. Because
no, good.
You know, no, patent pending. I'm very serious about that.
Yes.
Because I thought like, you know, someone obnoxious would do that. It's like combine two words. And also Portia is named after Shakespeare and Portia. That is where I pulled that name from.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it is named after that. People thought it was spelled like the car. I go, no. I think Portia's parents would be so up their own ass. They're like, we're going to name her after a Shakespeare character. Like, it just makes her more hoity-toity than, so I always like that. But it was just, you know, people could argue the politics of it all they want. To me, it was just, you know, I'm a woman. I think we're all considered feminists, but there's a lot of elements to modern day feminism that I don't agree with, because sometimes it's not really based in facts, and it's not really based in helping people. Sometimes a lot of people, when they say I'm a feminist, it's just it's for like selfish motivations, or it's just
very
to say
petty
like,
reasons. Like,
yeah, or like we're better, or, you know, like we are better than men. I mean, it's not everybody, obviously, but there's just certain elements to modern day feminism that I don't agree with, because it's not helpful. It doesn't help the conversation. You know, you're just drowning out voices that should be heard. And to me, Portia is that idea times a million. That's who she is to me.
Yeah, because I remember
everything is a man's fault. Like, she's not going to listen to logic. She's going to steamroll over everybody, because as long as she gets what she wants, it doesn't matter. And she's going to use feminism as the crutch to storm over everybody. Like, that's who Portia is. That's why she's a heel, is because she's a bad, like, she's these little bad elements that I've seen in reality and then expounded on like 1,000 times. Like, that's who she is. That's why she's a heel. Is because should you cheer on feminism as a thing? Absolutely. Should you cheer on a woman who's trying to, you know, establish herself and be independent? Absolutely. Should you cheer Portia? Hell no, because she's a jerk. Absolutely not. She's a jerk. Her intentions aren't good. You know, heels. Their intentions are not good. Their intentions are always very selfish, like selfish motivation. So that's why she's the way that she is. So even if you go, like, I can't tell you how many people, like a lot of women, like, love Portia. And I'm like, are you sure? She's not supposed to be loved. Like, she's the bad elements of what we're supposed to be supporting. Like, because some people think like, yeah, totally. Like, we cheer you on. Like, no, you're not supposed to. So like, I try to remember, I'm like, I still have to be a jerk, because sometimes they just see like, yeah, feminists, we love ladies. I'm like, that's great, but not this one. Like, she's a hero.
Yeah, like, this one is like, yeah, it's like, because I was actually reviewing, because I review Catalyst Wrestling for, you know, Matthew, and a few weeks ago, the show was doing like a mixtape of things that was happening, and one of the segments that was your promo from Skankfest last year, where you were because you were basically giving the crowd a list of list of rules, i.e. demands.
I was giving a presentation on feminist terms that I felt they should know.
Yeah, and I'm just watching this, and like, it's like, if this was a real life person doing this inside, well, not inside, but doing this outside of a crowd on a mic, someone would probably like just walk up to her and just go. But since this is like I'm just like, this is a woman who will probably get punched in the face.
She definitely get tomatoes thrown at her. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm just like,
people were not happy.
But as I'm watching this as a wrestling fan, I'm like, this is how you do heel heat. I'm like, this is amazing. Like this is how you make someone like hate you, but at the same time be like, you know what? I hate you as a character, but I love your moxie.
Skankfest was an interesting experience. It was for those who don't know, it was we had there was a comedy festival called Skankfest, so it's just stand-ups. But Catalyst Wrestling is on the Gash Digital Network, which is a podcast network with a lot of comedians on it. You know, we have a bit of a relationship with them, and they wanted us to do kind of like an hour showcase, almost like not like a full-out show because our shows are normally 2.5 hours. So it was just an hour. So we had obviously it was cut down, stripped down. We had a lot of we had very few matches, and then of course myself, because I think the person I was managing at the time wasn't available, but they wanted me to do something, and for that audience, which is 99.9% male. You know, they're a certain type of audience. You remember I spoke earlier about like the Opie and Anthony comedians, and that's who Skankfest is. That's their audience. Like I knew what I was walking into because I've been working with these types of people for many years. I'm very familiar with this like demographic, and I'm like, yeah, they're gonna hate Portia. Like this is gonna be amazing. Yeah. Even before I walked out. Like I also had John, who played Petruchio. He introduced me. Like I had him pretend to be like this official who's like, excuse me, we need to have equal time for women. So he came out in like a suit and pretended to be this like official, like, no, you all need to hear from a woman. And the second he opened his mouth and said that, just booze. Like it was just a sea of yelling. And I remember I was backstage with Ben, who is an associate producer for Catalyst, but he is now also he's like my lackey.
Oh, okay.
We've known each other a number of years. We're very good friends. He's playing like my lackey. So who's
who's on the next episode, by the way? Ben is on my next episode. Ben is gonna be on my next episode.
Oh, okay.
Not this episode that's coming on Friday, but the one I'm filming right after yours. So.
Oh, awesome! Yeah, I love him. So we're like behind the curtain. I just hear boos before I even step out there, and I'm jumping up and down. I'm like, yes, they're so angry. This is great. They're gonna hate us so much. It's fantastic. But yeah, it was just like if you see it, it's the whole Skankfest thing is also on a DVD. It's actually being sold in Walmart. I think it's being sold on Amazon, oddly enough. But you can see the whole show, or just our part, really. I mean, so yeah. But yeah, that was the idea I had. I'm like, I want this to be presentational, so obviously I have an opportunity to talk down to them, because that's all Portia does, is she thinks she's better than everybody else. So I was like, let me come up with a list of feminist terms, which, by the way, most of them don't exist. Like, if you want to go and watch it, some of the terms I came up with did exist, but some of them didn't. So it's just stuff that I made up. Like, so yeah, the whole time they're just, I think, screaming. They're just trying to scream over me. All the standard stuff that you could yell at a woman. Make me a sandwich, get back to the kitchen. I didn't care about that. It was the first time I had people yell at me, show us your private parts. But they didn't say that. And I've never had that chance at me before. That was a first for me. They said, show us your breast. Obviously didn't say breast. I've had that shouted at me, sure. But the other thing, no, that was a first. That was that was lovely. I
think,
but it didn't offend me at all. I was like, yes, please, the worst you can. Like, it's amazing.
It's just more.
And the people obviously afterwards, like, yeah, that was. Yeah, no, absolutely. The worst you can shout at me. I don't care. It does not offend me. Um, and then afterwards, like, obviously everyone was like, yeah, that was great. That was hilarious. Like, yeah, that's the whole point. Like, she's a heel, but I also, I try to make it, like, I also try to make it funny.
Yeah.
Like, I take a lot of pride in what I take a lot of pride in what I write. I try to put in these little Easter eggs that maybe no one else will notice it, but I do. Like, I had a backstage promo once where I, throughout everything I said, I would throw in real lines from Shakespeare. I would throw in references just because I was like, yeah, she would be hoity-toity enough that she would do that. Or we did an interview where someone interviewed Portia that was on one of our TV episodes. And throughout the whole interview, every answer I gave had a line from The Handmaid's Tale in it. I'm like, no one could ever notice to the end of time, but I know. Like, you know what I mean? I like putting a little more thought into what I say. Even if nobody notices these things, I like doing it. It makes me, I try to be proud of what I say and have, like, when she's out there, I try to make everything she says not the standard, my guy is going to beat your guy and your guy sucks.
Yeah.
Like, I try to not make it as generic. I try to make everything a little bit special. I try to, like, pick a theme, or I get an idea, or I hear a phrase and I'm like, okay, I can build something around that. Like, I don't know, for example, we, Catalyst did a show last August, in August 2019, we did an away show. We were in Nashville.
Yeah.
And it was to raise money for this guy who was wrongfully convicted, Adam Brazil. And it was a lot of fun, but it was also very similar in that, like, I think it was on the shorter side. And so I remember, like, what do I want to say? And I always wait until something, like, strikes me. And I came up with this phrase that I honestly used in a real argument with somebody. And the phrase was, behavior dictates opinion, which means how you act is going to tell me how you think. Behavior dictates opinion. And that's all it took. And I'm like, okay, cool. And then I had a whole promo, like, where I hit, like, 3 different points, because also in comedy, it's also the golden rule in writing, rule of 3. I always hit 3 points. So I did that, and it was behavior dictates opinion. I still remember that. And I had like one of the female wrestlers on the show, like, when you were speaking, I was like, yeah, I was so excited. Like, yeah, you go, girl. Like, no, you're supposed to hate her. Because some of the stuff I was saying was real. I was, saying how, men in wrestling, like, sometimes don't think you're a performer, or, like, you're someone in charge. They just think you're the girlfriend of somebody, like, won't shake your hand. But I'm saying this as Portia, because she would also feel offended as a woman in wrestling. She's like, oh, all these people disrespect me, or they think that I don't deserve any, deserve to be looked at in the eye, or deserve to have my hand shake my hand, things like that. What happens is I'll think of a theme, or I'll hear something, or I'll hear a quote, and I'm like, I could use this. Like, I'll take this and remember it, and then, like, expand on it.
And I think on that note, because right now it's like I'm pushing like an hour and 45 minutes in terms of filming this, so we talked a long time. But
I talk a lot. I know. I like to get across what I'm trying to say.
I honestly have to say, I have the same problem. But I think to wrap it up to a more faster way, I'll just forego some of the questions I have. Social media. Do you have any social media that you want to plug that people might want to go and say, yeah, you know what? Even though I hate this sport, even though I hate this character you play, I love you. So where can we find you?
Sure. So to start it off with, for Portia does have a Twitter at the Portia Vaughn. And Vaughn is Vaughn.
It has to be
well, Portia Vaughn is taken. There is actually a real Portia Vaughn. There's actually a real girl with that name who follows me.
Oh, wow.
Like an actual Portia Vaughn. Like, oh God, sorry. Like, spelled the same way. But that's that. For myself, since my name can be really hard. So if you look on Twitter, Instagram, and yes, TikTok, if you search God's Unwanted Daughter, you will also find me. Like that's my handle, is God's Unwanted Daughter.
Which
You know,
is
or
an amazing handle, by the way.
or if you put Steph, you can also look for Steph Sottile. It's my real name. But yeah, or God's Unwanted Daughter. You should find me on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok.
And on that note, thank you, Steph Sottile, for joining me on Performing the Arts. My name, as always, is Brian M. Davis. I hope you had a fun episode, just listening and hearing about different ideas. But yeah, Steph, thank you again, and
of course, thank you.
Be safe and just take care, buddy. Until next time.